Thanks for having me today, folks. So how many of you were BlackBerry users before? Yeah? Now, I love learning things about the audience here. How many of you are using BlackBerry products or have interacted with BlackBerry products today? Not as many hands went up. Well, let me ask you a question. How many of y'all took a shower today? Do we want to have the hands go back up? Because more than half of the water purification plants in America are powered by software that comes from BlackBerry, our QNX real-time operating system. If you used lights today, you interacted with BlackBerry software. We've made a big shift as an organization from a hardware-based company into a software-based organization. Now, BlackBerry's always been a software company. Way back when BlackBerry was introduced to the market, when we brought out those first BlackBerry devices, the pagers, it was a software-oriented device built on a hardware platform that simply didn't exist anywhere else. Since then, we've evolved quite a bit. We created the smartphone. We simply added a voice application to a database device, hence the smartphone and the smartphone market. Now, since then, we've done a lot. We've changed a lot as an organization, and I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. Now, when I go to events like this, a lot of people go, BlackBerry, like, aren't you guys like dead? Didn't you guys die already? 11 straight quarters of positive adjusted EBITDA from a results perspective. 3 years ago, yeah, we had some financial challenges. We burned like $1 billion in a quarter. We're not doing that anymore. We're quite well positioned from a cash perspective, and we've been growing the organization. I sit in the strategy organization. Last year, we invested somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million in inorganic growth. We brought in solutions providers from the software perspective that power your organizations today. We acquired good technology to provide a secure container across all of the mobile devices and endpoints. We acquired AtHoc. Now, I'm very appreciative of what AtHoc brings to us because I live on the east coast of Florida. And anybody that follows the news saw how bad Matthew was starting to look and how devastating that could have been for our entire country, all the way up the eastern seaboard. I think we're all grateful that it was nowhere near as bad as it was. But AtHoc brought us the ability to communicate with each other, to find out where was our staff inside of the government, ICE, Veterans Affairs, all used the AtHoc platform to locate their employees and check to find out that they were okay after the storm had moved through. So when we talk about these things, I think it's always good to look back. And being here in DC, we're going to measure everything in terms of administration. So let's look back 8 years, right? What did things look like 8 years ago? I think this is a generous stat that smartphone penetration was 22% and only tripled during that time frame. Now, smartphone adoption's still not everywhere because if we look out there, how many people have those flip phones that I think they call them feature phones. I've carried a smartphone for so long that I kind of forgot that term. But we look at what's changed. So 8 years ago, I think it's safe to say that organizationally, you'd expect your staff to have internet in their home. But your staff never had mobile data. Mobile data was new. It was something that work provided. Your kids certainly didn't have mobile data. They weren't texting each other all day long and surfing Flickr and Twitter and every other new application that shows up. Heck, apps didn't exist. What did it take to get an application out there 8 years ago? You had to work with the carrier and you had to get certified. The biggest change came to everybody in July of 2008. It was the introduction of the App Store by Apple. That October, Google introduced the Android marketplace. That brought applications to the masses, but that changed the world as we knew it from an application perspective. All of a sudden, everybody had instant access to applications and an app that did everything and anything. So if we start to think about what do people that have grown up with that expect, they expect quick in and out experiences. They expect an organization to be very agile and be able to quickly deliver to them just what they need in the slice that they're looking for. IT tended to drive things 8 years ago. IT was ahead of the curve. Security was easily managed. Endpoints, what did you have? You had the BlackBerries and you had laptops. People had a desktop in the office, they had a laptop. They didn't have multiple smartphones, there wasn't BYOD, there certainly wasn't bring your own X, bring whatever you want to work and connect it up. And cyber attacks were quite a bit different. Cyber attacks tended to come from individuals or a small criminal group. Maybe ransomware was starting to show up. Viruses were one thing. Now all of a sudden, the world has changed, and we find that viruses aren't the biggest concern. State-sponsored terrorism through cyber attacks starts to become the concern that people are dealing with and living with today. Now, when we think about bring your own IT into the organization, why do people do it? It's to make their life easier and to give them access to do their job in a better and faster manner than what the organization was able to provide for them. This is why the State Department moved to home-based email servers across multiple administrations, I guess. But they did it because it was easier. Now, as we start to think about what do we have to do and what do we have to think about over the next 8 years, can anybody predict what that landscape might look like? So I'll ask you another question. What's the largest fleet from a vehicle perspective, single fleet in the world? Who owns it? USPS is close. It's a part of it. It's the U.S. federal government. U.S. government has 640,000 vehicles. 640,000. That's 4 times the number of UPS and FedEx vehicles combined. That's not small. That's a huge fleet. Now, what is it about this that makes it important to us? How many people have ever had a recall on their vehicle before? You take it in, the mechanic does some work on it. Why was your car recalled? The brake unit was bad. Those are historical reasons. Most frequent reason right now, software update. Today's vehicles have 60 integrated circuits and hundreds of millions of lines of code. By 2020, they're going to have 90 plus integrated circuits in the average vehicle on the road. So we have to think as a government, what are those endpoints? It's no longer just what has come up over the past couple of years, but it's ever expanding. If we look at our user base wants every application you can imagine on every platform and endpoint. So what hits the news most often right now when it comes to automotive? Autonomous driving. So I took an Uber here today, and somebody drove me. I think in a couple of years, I'm going to dial up Uber on my phone, and a driverless vehicle is going to show up. But what does a car have? It's got all this great glass surface. And what does glass do? It's a great viewing surface. So now I can watch TV, I can do my email, I can do whatever I want to. Now, if we think about that, 8 years ago, the car was nothing more than an accessory to your smartphone. You connected your smartphone into the vehicle, and the vehicle could access things. Maybe it could read your email to you, maybe you could play your music, you could talk over the Bluetooth and everything. Recently, BMW announced their 2017 5 Series with full direct integration to Microsoft Office 365 Exchange. So now instead of taking the hammer to the smartphone to destroy the emails, that's a pretty big hammer to destroy that car, to get rid of that content that was on there. But your endpoint just changed. So when you start to think about security and you start to think about managing the endpoints, you need to think about what are those endpoints. I mentioned the UPS fleet. Now UPS categorized their fleet as vehicles, motorcycles, and then at the end of it they had a footnote that said they had 7,200 alternate fuel and alternate technology vehicles. Alternate technology vehicles. Drones. How many of you are starting to think of drones being a part of the mobile endpoints that you need to secure as a part of your environment? Because the time to start thinking about it is now. When we think about that hurricane that came through, the ability to survey the power lines, the ability to check for damage, that was all done by drones. Those are the things that we need to think about as we start to explore what's going to take place and how we plan for the future. Applications are everywhere. There's an app for everything. The workers that you're going to have in the future are going to want to find the app that makes them most productive. But how do they do that while you maintain the security of that application? This is going to be the top challenge most IT organizations face over the next little while. You heard earlier today about technologies that did things like taking photos and recognizing them and the data within them. The ability to take notes. Instead of on a piece of paper, Maybe I pull out my non-exploding Samsung Note version with the S Pen and take a manual note. But where does that go when it transcribes my text and my very poor handwriting, illegible handwriting, over into actual text? Who's doing that in the cloud, and how's that data secured, especially if I'm somebody from FEMA out there after a storm gathering information from somebody that may include PII data? Those are all the things we need to think about as we start to think about how do we react in an agile fashion to the end user to stay ahead of them, but how do we also make sure that we're delivering the security that we're required to. So as we think about this, we went out and surveyed, because we said 8 years, that's a long time to bring smartphones in. We went out and surveyed government entities across the Five Eyes, the big cooperating security countries around the world, and wanted to know, what's your position on mobility? We found 52% believe mobile devices remain a vulnerability, and 43% view BYOD as a risk. And most of that is because they're not able to fully control what those end users do. And sometimes it's not the end user being malicious, it's simply the end user trying to find a way of how they could accomplish their tasks in front of them faster and more accurately than if they were following the existing protocols. So, what can we do? Develop a strategy. You need to balance that agility. We need to be able to accept new technologies in a rapid fashion, but we need to have an underlying platform that says that we can secure the things that are going on inside of there. So if we replace a paper-based algorithm or workflow with something that's been digitalized, how do we know that that will be secure every time all the way through? We need to think about those other endpoints, the drones, the BMW 5 Series that's going to connect directly to the mail system. All of a sudden, that data is outside of your typical sphere of control, and that what you may be thinking about is where you need to control data. We need to think about what other endpoints may show up. When you think about that platform, you want to make sure you have a platform that's been designed with one thing in mind, which is we don't know what we need to manage 5 years down the road from now. If we rewound, 10 years ago, and we thought somebody's going to carry to work a smartphone from work, a smartphone that's their own, a tablet, an e-reader, a laptop, or if we went home and started counting the Wi-Fi access devices. When you put your first Wi-Fi network in your house, you thought, I'm going to connect my computer. Does anybody count how many devices they have anymore? I have 2 kids. They're 8 and 11 years old. I gave up counting the connected devices that they bring home and connect from all the school stuff and the video game machines and things like that. We don't know what's next. And we need to be prepared for that by thinking about this from an open perspective. And we need to think, what's that broader ecosystem that we engage with? When we start to think about who our agency works with, what other partners do we need to share information with? One of the things we did at BlackBerry over the past couple of years that I mentioned was go out and invest in software security companies, Good Technologies, Ad Hoc, Watchdocs. We went out and invested in DRM. The Post Office Inspector General is able to securely share investigative reports that contain all kinds of confidential data by using our DRM to protect the data no matter where that data goes. One of the things that we learned is we don't know the endpoint. So let's secure all the way down to the data layer. It's not just data at rest on a device and data in motion. It's data at rest wherever that data may end up and may go. We need to ensure that we don't stop thinking about what new endpoints may show up and may be a part of our overall IT environment as time goes on. So from BlackBerry's perspective, we've done security since the start. We've been involved in software security across more endpoints than we can count. Anybody uses a Nest thermostat, your security comes from BlackBerry inside of that. Anybody has a vehicle with OnStar, your security comes from BlackBerry. The new Ford vehicles, those are no longer powered as a part of the experience inside of Microsoft, inside of Ford by Microsoft. Those are now powered by QNX as a part of the BlackBerry family. So as you can see, we've really transitioned. We're enabling our partners in the US government to continue to meet their mission. Over the past month, from things like Ad Hoc all the way through to the Air Force and the mobile mission kit that they use to automate the redeployment of aircraft to get it back into the field of battle faster, all powered by BlackBerry software. So we'd love to talk to you more and let you know what we can do to help you meet your mobile missions as things continue to evolve over the next administration. Thank you.